Zuri walked into the police station, her steps calm but firm. She tried to explain something serious, but the officers like Kofi and Jabari only laughed. They thought she was just an ordinary woman with silly fears. Zuri stayed quiet, but inside she was stronger than they imagined. The station was busy that morning. Phones rang, papers moved, and voices filled the room. Among all the noise, Zuri's quiet words seemed small, but her eyes told a different story. She spoke of something dangerous she had seen, something she believed the police needed to stop before it was too late. Kofi leaned back in his chair, smirking. Jabari folded his arms, shaking his head. They whispered to each other and both chuckled. To them, Zuri was just another villager with wild tales. Her plain dress and soft voice did not impress them. They thought she had come to waste their time. Jabari even told her, "Go home, Mama, this is not for you. Leave the big matters to us." His words cut like a knife, but Zuri did not argue. She lowered her eyes, nodded politely, and stood in silence. What they did not see was the strength she carried within. Zuri had lived through struggles far harder than their laughter. She knew the danger she had spoken of was real. She had seen shadows moving at night, heard whispers of men planning in the dark. She had felt the unease in the air, the same way one feels the heaviness before a storm. But no one else wanted to believe. As the officers returned to their papers and chatter, Zuri stood for a moment longer. Her heart pounded, but her face stayed calm. She realized then that convincing them would not be possible. They had already decided she was ordinary. They had already judged her by what they saw, not by what she carried inside. With a quiet sigh, she turned and walked out of the station. Outside the sun was bright, but Zuri's thoughts were heavy. The sound of the officers' laughter still rang in her ears. For a brief moment, doubt tried to creep in. Was she truly foolish to worry so much? Maybe the danger she felt was only in her mind? But then she remembered the faces she had seen in the dark alley, the way the men whispered, the strange boxes they carried. It was real. She was certain. She stopped by the marketplace on her way home. People moved about with baskets of fruit and grain. Children ran between stalls, their laughter rising in the warm air. To them it was just another ordinary day. Zuri wished it could stay that way. She wanted nothing more than peace for her village. That was why she had gone to the police in the first place. But now she realized she might have to protect that peace herself. As she walked past the stalls, some people greeted her kindly, while others barely noticed her. She looked ordinary to everyone, an older woman with a simple scarf tied over her head, carrying a small bag. No one could guess what she had seen or what she was thinking. No one could guess that she was preparing herself for something much bigger than a market day. That night, Zuri sat by the small fire in her home. The crackling flames warmed the room, but her mind was restless. She thought of Kofi and Jabari, their mocking smiles, their careless laughter. She thought of how quickly they had judged her. But she did not feel anger toward them. Instead she felt pity. They were blind to what was coming. They could not see what she could see. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Long ago he had told her, "Never wait for others to believe in you before you act. If your heart is sure, then your steps must follow." Those words had guided her through many storms. They gave her courage now. She knew she could not depend on the police. She would have to trust herself. The following days, Zuri moved quietly, watching and listening. She returned to the places where she had first noticed the strange men. She paid attention to the alleys, the shadows, the movements no one else seemed to see. She was careful, never letting herself be noticed. The more she observed, the more certain she became that something dangerous was close. Back at the police station, Kofi and Jabari still laughed whenever her name came up. They called her the dreamer, and joked about her fears. To them she was nothing but a story to share when the day grew boring. They had no idea that Zuri was already uncovering truths they themselves had missed. Yet Zuri kept her silence. She did not go back to argue with them. She did not waste her energy trying to prove herself. Instead she let them believe what they wanted while she prepared. She understood that sometimes, the strongest voice is not the loudest one. Sometimes strength is quiet, patient, and steady. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the hills, Zuri stood by her window. The village looked calm, the children's laughter fading into the night. But she knew danger could rise at any moment. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "They think I am ordinary, but they do not know me. They will see." She turned from the window, her face set with determination. Whatever came next, she would be ready. She warned them about a crime that was coming, but no one believed her. The police mocked her words. Zuri left the station, her mind clear. If no one would listen, she would find another way to stop what was coming. As she stepped outside, the sound of laughter followed her out the door. It was not the laughter of joy but of disbelief. It stung her heart for a moment, but she did not let it break her. She walked down the dusty road, her head high, her feet steady. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and red, but in her mind there was only darkness. She thought of the faces she had seen in the shadows, men carrying boxes into an abandoned warehouse. She thought of the whispers she had overheard, voices speaking of a plan that would bring fear to the village. She remembered the sharp smell of fuel and the strange marks on the walls where they gathered. These were not small things. This was real, and yet no one had listened. Zuri stopped at the edge of the market square. The stalls were closing, sellers packing up their goods. Children ran past her, chasing each other with laughter, their joy filling the air. She smiled at them softly, but inside she wondered how long their peace would last. If the men carried out their plan, these same streets would not be safe. She sat on a wooden bench for a while, watching the village move into night. She thought of her father again, remembering the strength he had taught her. He had always said, "When others turn away, you must be the one who stands firm." Those words echoed in her heart. She knew she could not turn away now. Zuri decided she would begin by finding proof. If the police would not take her words seriously, perhaps they would believe their own eyes. She rose from the bench and walked toward the narrow alleys where she had first noticed the strange men. She moved slowly, blending into the night, her scarf wrapped tight around her head. She walked as if she was just another villager on her way home, but her eyes were sharp, searching every corner. At the end of the alley she stopped and listened. A faint sound reached her ears, low voices, hurried steps, the scrape of something heavy being moved. Her heart beat faster, but she did not run. Instead, she stepped back into the shadows, pressing herself against the wall. From there she could see without being seen. 3 men walked past carrying a wooden crate. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, muttered about the night of fire. Another laughed harshly, saying the village would never see it coming. Zuri's eyes narrowed. Fire. That was what the fuel smell had been. They were planning something far worse than she had imagined. When the men disappeared into the warehouse, Zuri stayed still for a long moment. She wanted to follow, but she knew it was too dangerous to go inside alone. Instead, she noted every detail: the size of the crate, the direction they had come from, the words they had spoken. She whispered these details to herself so she would not forget. She returned home late that night, her steps quiet on the path. Inside her small hut, she lit a lamp and wrote everything down on a piece of paper. Her handwriting was careful, each word sharp and clear. She wanted no one to doubt what she had seen. She folded the paper and tucked it into a small wooden box. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would continue to gather proof. The next morning she moved through the village as if nothing was wrong. She bought vegetables from the market, greeted neighbors politely and smiled at the children. But inside, her mind was focused on the warehouse. She planned her next step. She needed to see how many men there were, what they were hiding, and when they planned to act. That evening, Zuri returned to the alleys. She crouched behind a wall, her scarf pulled low over her face. From her hiding place she counted 5 men this time. They carried not only crates but also sacks, heavy and bulging. One of them cursed as he dropped something sharp that clanged against the ground. Zuri's eyes widened when she saw what it was. A long metal bar shaped like a weapon. Her heart pounded. These were not simple thieves. This was something larger, something dangerous for everyone in the village. She wanted to shout, to run to the police and make them listen, but she stopped herself. She knew they would not believe her without more proof. She stayed hidden until the men left, then moved quickly to the spot where the bar had fallen. It was too heavy for her to take, but she brushed her fingers across the cold metal, memorizing its shape. Again she whispered the details to herself. She would add it to her notes later. The night was quiet when she walked home, but her spirit was alive with determination. She knew what she was doing was dangerous, but she also knew it was right. If no one else would protect the village, she would. She could not sit and wait for disaster. By the 3rd day, Zuri had enough notes to fill several pages. She had drawn the shape of the crates, described the faces of the men, and listed the things she had overheard. Her small wooden box was now filled with evidence. All she needed was the right moment to reveal it. When she passed the police station again, she glanced at the door but did not enter. Inside, Kofi and Jabari would still be laughing, still mocking. She did not waste her breath. Instead, she whispered to herself, "They will see the truth when the time comes." And she believed it. She believed it with all her heart. What the police did not know was Zuri's past. She had been trained in defense by her late father, a respected guard named Diallo. She had courage and she had knowledge. Zuri started gathering proof, while the police still ignored her. Her father had been a strong man, not only in body but also in spirit. Diallo had served the community for many years, protecting the people and teaching them discipline. When Zuri was a little girl, she would sit by the doorway and watch him train. He showed her how to listen, how to wait, and how to act with courage when the time was right. Many thought his lessons were too hard for a young girl, but Diallo had always believed his daughter was special. Strength, he used to say, is not only in the arms. It is here. He would tap his chest where his heart beat. Courage begins in the heart, Zuri. If your heart is strong, your hands will follow. Those words stayed with her long after he was gone. Now, as she walked the narrow alleys of the village, those lessons guided her. The police may have laughed, but she did not need their approval. She had her father's voice inside her, reminding her that ordinary eyes often miss the danger that careful eyes can see. Each evening, Zuri returned to the warehouse where the men gathered. She moved silently, keeping to the shadows. She watched how many entered, how long they stayed, and what they carried. Sometimes she hid behind a stack of baskets, other times behind a broken wall. She never allowed herself to be seen. She noticed that the men had a leader. He was tall, with a scar on his cheek and a deep voice that commanded the others. His name, she learned, was Malik. The men respected him, and they seemed to follow his orders without question. Zuri listened closely when he spoke, catching words like attack, fire, and supplies. The plan was bigger than she had thought. At home, she wrote everything down. Her small wooden box filled with notes and drawings. She sketched the faces of the men, the shape of the crates, and the marks on the warehouse doors. She listed the nights they met and the words she overheard. Each page was a piece of the puzzle, and slowly the picture became clear. Malik and his men were planning to strike the village when no one expected it. The police might have ignored her warnings, but Zuri refused to give up. Her father had trained her to look beyond doubt. He had shown her that truth often comes quietly before it is loud. And so she waited and gathered, each day adding more to her hidden box. One night, while crouching behind a wall, Zuri almost lost her breath when she saw two new faces among the men. They were younger, nervous, and unsure, but Malik treated them like recruits. She heard him say, "Once we begin, there will be no turning back." The younger men nodded, their faces pale in the dim light. Zuri's heart raced. It meant Malik was building a larger group. The threat was growing and time was running out. She returned home and sat by her small fire, staring at her notes. For a moment, fear tried to crawl into her mind. Could she stop something so big alone? Could her courage stand against Malik and all his men? But then she remembered Diallo again. She saw his face in her memory, calm and proud, telling her, "Even if you stand alone, you are not weak. One strong heart can protect many." The next day, she moved through the market as usual, but her eyes stayed sharp. She noticed Malik's men buying sacks of grain and barrels of oil, more than any household could use. She followed quietly as they carried the goods toward the warehouse. She did not get too close, but she noted every movement. It was all part of the plan. Still, the police did not listen. Kofi and Jabari were busy with their usual duties, writing reports and drinking tea. When Zuri passed by the station, she could hear them laughing again. They had no idea that while they mocked her, the danger was growing each night. Zuri's courage was not loud, but it was steady. She kept her face calm, her steps slow, and her eyes open. To the villagers, she looked like any other woman living her ordinary days. No one guessed that she was gathering the kind of proof that could save them all. One evening, as the sky turned dark, she followed Malik's men once more. This time she saw something new. They rolled out a large barrel and placed it near the door. Malik gave orders in a low voice and the men worked quickly. Zuri's heart raced. She did not know what was inside the barrel, but she was certain it was dangerous. She leaned closer, trying to catch Malik's words, and she heard him say, "The day is near. Be ready." Those words echoed in her ears all the way home. She sat in the dim light of her lamp, writing them down again and again. The day is near. It meant the plan was close to happening. She knew she had little time left. As she placed the paper inside her wooden box, she whispered to herself, "They think I am ordinary. They think I am nothing. But I see more than they know. I will not let them destroy what my father protected." Her courage burned quietly, like the flame of her lamp. The police might still ignore her, but she was no longer waiting for their approval. She was preparing herself for the moment when everything would change. The crime began one night, just as Zuri had warned. The criminals tried to strike. The police panicked, but Zuri was ready. She acted fast, guiding others and stopping the danger. The officers, including Kofi and Jabari, were shocked to see her bravery. It was a quiet night in the village. The streets were almost empty, the houses dark, and only the sound of insects filled the air. But in the shadows, Malik and his men moved like hunters. They carried torches, barrels, and crates. Their faces were hard and their steps were quick. Tonight was the night they had planned for so long. Inside the police station, Kofi and Jabari sat at their desks. They were half asleep, drinking tea and talking lazily. Suddenly, a loud shout broke the silence. Flames rose at the edge of the market square. Villagers screamed as smoke filled the air. The officers jumped up, their eyes wide. They rushed outside, but when they saw the men with weapons and fire, fear struck them. Kofi grabbed his gun, but his hands shook. Jabari shouted orders, but his voice was weak. Neither of them had expected this. They remembered Zuri's warnings, but they had laughed at her. Now the danger was real and they were unprepared. In the middle of the panic, Zuri appeared. Her scarf was tied tight, her eyes sharp, and her steps strong. She did not look afraid. She ran toward the villagers who were frozen in fear. "Move to the safe side," she shouted, waving her hands to guide them. Children clung to their mothers and old men stumbled, but Zuri helped them find safety behind the stone walls. Malik saw her and laughed. "This woman thinks she can stop us," he shouted to his men. They raised their torches higher, ready to set the market stalls on fire. But Zuri did not back down. She picked up a long stick from the ground and struck the torch from one man's hand. The flame fell onto the dirt and went out. The villagers gasped. Kofi and Jabari stood frozen, watching her. She was moving with the speed and strength of someone trained. Every step reminded her of her father's lessons. She blocked one man's swing, dodged another's strike, and shouted for the villagers to keep moving away. The criminals tried to scare her, but Zuri's eyes did not show fear. She called out, "This village will not fall to you. Leave now before it is too late." But Malik only grew angrier. He ordered his men to attack. Zuri stood firm. She moved quickly, using her stick to block and strike. The men were surprised that a woman they had thought ordinary could fight so fiercely. Some villagers began to gather courage, throwing water on the flames and pulling others to safety. Inspired by Zuri's bravery, they no longer ran helplessly. They started to resist. Kofi and Jabari finally came to their senses. They rushed forward, guns raised, but their shots went wide in the confusion. Zuri shouted at them, "Control the fire. Stop the flames." They listened to her without question. For the first time, the officers were following her lead. The fire spread quickly, but Zuri kept her focus. She saw a barrel rolling toward the stalls, fuel spilling from it. Without thinking, she ran forward and pushed it away before it could ignite. Her arms burned with effort, but she did not stop until it was far from the fire. Sweat dripped from her forehead, but her eyes were bright with determination. Malik grew furious. His plan was breaking apart. He lunged at Zuri himself, swinging a heavy stick. She met him head-on, blocking his strike with her own. The clash echoed through the square. Malik was stronger, but Zuri was quicker. She remembered her father's words, "Strength is not only in arms. It is in the heart." She dodged his second blow and struck his arm, making him drop his weapon. The villagers cheered, their voices rising like a wave. The other criminals hesitated, their courage fading. Some tried to run, but Kofi and Jabari, now braver, blocked their way. With the villagers' help, the men were caught one by one. Zuri stood over Malik, her stick still in her hand. He glared at her, his pride broken. "You will pay for this," he hissed. But she only shook her head. "No," she said calmly, "you have already lost." The fire was finally under control. The villagers gathered around, their faces lit by the faint glow of the dying flames. Mothers hugged their children, elders whispered prayers of thanks, and men clapped each other's shoulders. They all looked at Zuri, their eyes wide with respect. Kofi and Jabari stood nearby, their faces red with shame. They remembered how they had laughed at her, how they had mocked her warnings. Now they had seen her courage with their own eyes. Jabari lowered his head and said softly, "We were wrong." Kofi nodded, unable to meet her gaze. But Zuri did not gloat. She simply stood tall, her breathing heavy but steady. She looked at the villagers and said, "You are safe now. That is what matters." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Everyone listened. As the night grew quiet again, the criminals were tied and taken into custody. Malik remained silent, his head bowed. The village slowly returned to calm, though the scars of the night were still visible. Burned stalls, scattered crates, and ashes lay across the square. But in the middle of it all stood Zuri, the woman they had once thought ordinary, now seen as the bravest among them. Kofi and Jabari walked to her and spoke with respect. "We mocked you when we should have listened," Kofi said. "Tonight you saved us all. We owe you more than we can say." Zuri looked at them quietly. She was tired, but her spirit was unshaken. "It is not about who is right or wrong," she answered. "It is about protecting the people. Next time listen. Do not wait until it is too late." Her voice was calm, but it carried a lesson that stayed in their hearts. The police officers, the villagers, and even the children knew they had witnessed something unforgettable. The night that began in fear had ended in courage. And at the center of it all was Zuri, the woman who had proved that strength is not always loud, but it is always real. The town was safe because of Zuri's strength. The police admitted they were wrong. They learned never to judge someone by looks alone. Zuri became a symbol of courage and respect in the community. The morning after the attack, the village was quiet. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, and the ground was black where the fire had burned. People walked slowly through the market square, picking up broken wood and fallen baskets. The damage was clear, but the danger was gone. The criminals were locked away, and their leader, Malik, sat in a cell with his eyes full of defeat. But the real story people spoke about was Zuri. Everywhere her name filled the air. Mothers told their children about her bravery. Elders shook their heads in wonder, saying they had never seen such strength in their lives. Men who once thought she was just an ordinary woman now spoke of her with deep respect. She had done what no one else had dared to do. Kofi and Jabari felt the weight of their shame heavier than anyone else. They remembered clearly how they had laughed at her when she first warned them. They remembered the way they had mocked her calm words, treating her like she was foolish. But when the danger came, it was Zuri who stood tall while they froze. That memory burned in their hearts. They went to find her the next day. Zuri was helping women gather water near the well. She worked quietly, her hands steady as if nothing special had happened. When Kofi and Jabari approached, the other villagers stepped aside. Everyone waited to hear what the officers would say. Kofi cleared his throat, his voice low. "Zuri," he said, "we owe you more than we can ever repay. We were blind when you tried to open our eyes. We were proud when we should have been humble. We judged you by what we thought you were, not by what you truly carried inside. For that we are sorry." Jabari nodded quickly. "You saved us all," he added. "You guided the people when we could not. You showed courage when we showed fear. The truth is, we mocked you because we did not understand you. But now we will never forget." Zuri listened quietly, her face calm. She did not smile, but her eyes were soft. "I did not act for thanks," she said simply. "I did it because this is our home. A home must be protected. Whether the police believe me or not, the people must always come first." Her words struck them deeply. The villagers nodded, murmuring in agreement. Children clapped their hands, and one little girl whispered to her mother, "I want to be like Zuri when I grow up." From that day, Zuri's name carried weight. People did not see her as just an ordinary woman anymore. They saw her as a protector, a leader, and a symbol of courage. She became someone the villagers looked to for guidance, even in small matters. When disputes rose in the market, people asked Zuri to help settle them. When new dangers appeared on the road, her advice was sought before anyone else's. Even the police began to change. Kofi and Jabari no longer laughed so easily. They listened more not only to Zuri but also to the villagers. They learned to look beyond appearances, to respect voices that were quiet but true. Their pride had been broken, but from that brokenness they found new strength. Zuri, however, never let the respect change her heart. She still lived simply, tending to her small hut, cooking her meals and greeting neighbors with a kind smile. She did not call herself a hero. She did not boast of her actions. To her, it was only what had to be done. But to the people she was much more. Over time, the story of that night spread beyond the village. Travelers carried the tale to nearby towns. They spoke of a woman who had warned the police, been mocked, but then saved everyone with her courage. Other communities listened and were inspired. The lesson was clear. Never judge by looks alone, for strength can live in the quietest soul. Children repeated the story at night around the fire, pretending to be Zuri with sticks in their hands. They acted out how she had stood against Malik, how she had pushed the barrel away from the flames, how she had faced danger with steady eyes. For them she became a legend. One evening, months after the attack, Zuri sat alone by her small lamp. The village was peaceful again. The stalls were rebuilt, laughter filled the market, and the nights were calm. She thought of her father, Diallo, and she smiled softly. She whispered, "I hope you are proud." She knew that his lessons had guided her every step, and through her, his spirit still protected the people. The police station was different now too. Kofi and Jabari often told new recruits about that night. They admitted their mistakes openly, saying, "We learned the hardest way. Courage can come from anyone. Respect every voice, for you never know who carries the truth." Their words carried Zuri's lesson far beyond the walls of the village. In time, Malik and his men faded from memory. They became nothing more than a warning about pride and violence. But Zuri's name remained. It was not spoken with fear or mockery anymore, but with love and respect. She was a reminder of what true courage looked like. The town grew stronger not only because the danger was gone, but because the people had learned. They understood now that every person carried a story, and every story deserved to be heard. No one dismissed quiet voices so quickly again. And at the heart of this change was Zuri, the woman once mocked as ordinary, who had shown that ordinary does not mean weak. She had proved that strength lies not in how someone looks, but in what they carry inside. The town was safe, but more than that, it was wiser. And for the rest of her life, Zuri's presence reminded them that courage is not loud, prideful, or boastful. Courage is steady, patient, and true.